The word threshold, appears in Hawthorne's The House of Seven Gables almost 30 times. The word is generally used to describe the entranceway to the House of the Seven Gables. Most obviously, because this threshold between the House of the Seven Gables and the outside world is a very loaded threshold. It's a portal from present to past. It's a portal from sunshine to darkness. It's a portal from uh, the variety of times changes to the repetition of guilt lived over and over again. So the first few times the word shows up, it does indeed describe the threshold of the House of Seven Gables all the way back in the time of Colonel Pynchon. The word also shows up in describing Hepzibah as she makes ready to move from being an impoverished, old, enervated woman to someone who wants to open up a shop so she can make money to support her brother Clifford. So in that regard, the threshold marks the, a turning point, possibly, from stasis to change, from being impoverished to making money, from an old way of doing things to a potentially new way of doing things. So it's clear that Hawthorne means a threshold, again, which he uses the word almost 30 times. He means it figuratively as well as literally throughout the novel. I want to think about threshold as a way of analyzing characters in the novel. Before I do that, I want to note that Hawthorne's probably most famous scene in all of his fiction, the opening scene of The Scarlet Letter, where we see Hester Prynne step out of the prison onto the scaffold, where she will be scorned for a whole day while wearing the scarlet A on her black dress and holding her baby Pearl. Hawthorne notes that as she enters into the sunlight, she crosses the threshold. So a threshold is a site of betweenness. It's a liminal site. It's a site that marks both division between one thing and another, but also it's a site that marks potential union of one thing and another. The threshold marks the difference between inside and outside, but also suggests that there might be similarity between inside and outside. Hawthorne was a man of betweenness. Just look at his biography. This is a man who, very much after graduating college at Bowdoin College, seemed to want to live a solitary life. He lived with his family for many years in Salem, spent a lot of time reading in the old historical annals, learning as much about New England history as he could, a knowledge that he mined for his fiction over and over again. So Hawthorne clearly was a man who liked being alone. Yet, he was also quite active in courting women. Late 1830s, or he was courting almost three women at the same time: Mary Silsby, Elizabeth Peabody, but also getting interested in Elizabeth's sister, Sophia Peabody. And ultimately, he fell in love with Sophia and chose to marry her in hopes that she would pull him out of his solitude and help make him part of a larger world. And of course, connected to his desire to be part of a larger world was his desire to be a famous author. So there's a part of him that wanted to be left alone in the attic reading, and there's another part of him that wanted to be famous, to be recognized as one of the great writers in the world. And Sophia, his wife, was sort of an agent between those two poles. Why? Once they married, they kept to themselves a good bit. They loved each other very much. The marriage was successful, but one could suggest that they might have isolated themselves a little bit from others. But at the same time, Sophia was a great support to Hawthorne as a writer. She wanted him to be successful, and she was more than willing to uh, provide the affirmation he needed in his quest to become a famous author. Not only this, even Hawthorne's definition of himself as an author is in a state of betweenness. There was a part of him that felt that writing was, to use the language of the day, unmanly. That if you were an artist, you were interested in dreams, illusions, wisps, uh, that you were separate from the world, that you were a voyeur, essentially. You just watched people do things, but you didn't do anything yourself. So that was one aspect of the writer for him, and he explores this idea of the writer as somehow divorced from the flows of life in both the artist, the beautiful, and the birthmark. But then at the same time, Hawthorne saw the writer as a sort of hypnotist, a mesmerist, a man of power who could, through his words, hypnotize, mesmerize his readers, who could become essentially incantatory in such a way as to put his readers under a spell. This vision of the writer is far from the retired voyeur living in his own dreams. So, Hawthorne is a man between solitude and society. Hawthorne is a writer between detached dreamer and vibrant mesmerist. So it makes sense that in a novel about a mesmerist, Holgrave, that Hawthorne might be interested in exploring different forms of betweenness. Now, we can say at the beginning that the challenge of the pensions is even to reach any kind of state of betweenness. There's a stasis to these characters. They all feel cursed by Maul's curse. And there's a tendency to repeat the dark past. The idea that one, if a pension is this way and not that way, that there's a clear identity of pensionness. Joffrey borders on this stasis because he does indeed repeat the Colonel. He looks like the Colonel. He dies like the Colonel. He seems to share some of the less appealing characteristics of the Colonel. So there's a way in which this is a character who rejects any sense of betweenness. He wants to be what he is. But this is entirely the case, as we know from Holgrave's daguerreotype, and as we know from Phoebe's intuition, there is a liminal quality to the judge. He is between the appearance of being affable, compassionate toward Phoebe and Clifford, between that generous side and a darker, sinister side that manipulates others, that is cruel to others, that in hopes of fulfilling his greedy desires. So we can say that one form of betweenness is either or. Joffrey is either, as he interacts with others, affable or sinister. He saves his sinister side for Hepzibah and Clifford, certainly. He puts a more affable front on for Phoebe. But the judge is ultimately a static character, just sort of moving back and forth between these two poles, shadow and substance, appearance, reality. His reality seems to be he is sinister. His appearance is, oh, I'm a great guy. There's another kind of thresholdness, we might say, in House of the Seven Gables. A thresholdness of both and. Characters who are able to look at life's oppositions and realize that you can't really choose between one or the other. That to choose between one or the other is ultimately to shut down possibilities. to choose one opposition or another is to essentially choose stasis over emotion. For instance, when Joffrey Pynchon dies, the narrator spends several pages talking about how time is rushing around this man. He is sitting dead in the chair. And this is what he would have done if he were alive. This is what he would have done if he were alive. This is what is happening in life, in time. And there's a heterogeneity, not only in terms of the diction of the prose, look at all this stuff he's missing, but also even the prose itself has a kind of choppy, punchy feel to it, as opposed to Hawthorne's typical very long, complicated sentences. So the betweenness of either or, one might say, is a failure to embrace the variation of life, to embrace the heterogeneity of life, to embrace risk and change. Certainly Hepzibah and Clifford are in danger of this themselves, but they show throughout the course of the novel an openness to try to get out of the house of the Seven Gables and open up to something fresh. So they avoid this betweenness of Joffrey. But the both and betweenness, the liminality of both and, which is a positive, is embodied by Phoebe and Holgrave. After Phoebe goes away to visit her relatives again, when she comes back to the house of the Seven Gables, twice the narrator says, oh, she's on the threshold of the house. Oh, she's on the threshold of the house. And then she enters into the house, and Holgrave pulls her in by the hand. And at that point, the two characters realize they're in love, and they express their love for each other. But part of their vitality as characters is that they seem to be able to live both sides of life simultaneously. As we know, Phoebe initially in the novel is pure sunshine. She's positive, she's hopeful, she's flexible, she's playful, and she really brightens up the house of the Seven Gables. But after hanging out with Clifford for a while, and Hepzibah for a while, and spending time with Holgrave, just basically experiencing the complexities of life, she becomes a little melancholy. She matures into a sorrow. But she doesn't give over to it like Clifford. She doesn't become a melancholiac. So she balances. She's finds a space sort of in between happiness and sorrow, hope and cynicism, and she's able to say yes to both sides. It's a generative betweenness, if you will, as opposed to the more stultifying betweenness of Joffrey. Holgrave the same. When we first meet Holgrave, he's a man all about newness. He hates dead things. He celebrates change for the sake of change. He has been all sorts of things in his life. He's been a writer. He's been a daguerreotypist. He's been a school teacher. He's just done all kinds of things. This is a man who just loves change and difference for the sake of change and difference. He is a man of no law. But once he falls in love with Phoebe, we're told he shifts and he wants to live in a house with her, that he wants to start following laws. Does this mean that he loses the spontaneity and the charm of the youth that was on display when he was celebrating change? No. Does it mean that he's just going to become conservative and staid? No. This is another character who's able to sort of move between oppositions and use them in a generative way. We can even see how before he expresses his love to Phoebe, he comes across as someone who is both very much interested in reform, but also very detached at the same time. He is kind of a voyeur, just studying the Pynchon household, much as Hawthorne as a writer saw himself as a voyeur. But yet, even though he does come across as cold and detached, he's also able, through a kind of sympathy, to mesmerize Phoebe and ultimately hypnotize her. So even though he's detached, he also has a powerful faculty for sympathy with another person. So 29 times, I think, Hawthorne uses thresholds. And so the word becomes a sort of lens through which we can study different characters in the novel. And ultimately, we realize that threshold can be a marker of difference, either or, and or. It could be a marker of difference, but also unity at the same time.